Hi, Jenna.
Hi.
Is I'm very glad to interview you. And my first question is, what is, to your mind and for you, what is good and what is bad musical composition? What makes musical composition good for you, right?
Oh man. Well, I think something I recognize as good is something I suppose that I can experience some joy in or perceive the joy of the maker in. Granted, the minute I say that, I'm suddenly thinking about other ways that are not joyful, that are also like kind of good. Like maybe the piece is intended to make me very uncomfortable. And then if it does it's what it intends to do, then it is good. So maybe then I revise that statement to say maybe I think something is good if it does uh, what is intended. Again, though, revising one more time, because maybe the thing the composer intends is not the thing that the listener or audience member perceives, but it could still be good even if I perceive something separately.
Yes.
But maybe those are three things that I think might make something good arbitrarily. Maybe I think it's good if there is joy for me or joy for the maker. Maybe I think if it's good if there is some kind of intention that is conveyed. And maybe I think it's good if the listener can walk away with something profound.
Right.
And those are not all mutually exclusive. Like they could overlap or they could happen separately of one
Yes.
another.
And which was the last piece, right? Which was the last piece?
That I heard that I thought was good.
Yes, yes.
This is hard. Okay. Mm. Let's come back to that. I have to think about it for a minute.
Okay.
Continue.
Next question, right? Which are those ideas which you maybe or which you usually are more fascinated in your music and which you more frequently come back to develop, or or maybe there is some kind of signature of yours?
Sure. I think something that comes back repeatedly in my work is, and I don't think it's unique to my work, it just happens to be this thing that I'm into because my body is my instrument. I'm a vocalist, I'm a dancer, and I came from musical theater. And I have always been accustomed to my body being the thing that is making the sound, right? And so looking at the way that that can extend into other realms of sound making, um, I am always trying to connect this with the thing that makes sound. Granted,
Yes.
that's sort of also a tale as old as time, right? A cellist does the same thing. Your body is making the sound. You are touching things, you are moving things. Um, but for me, I'm not an instrumentalist. And so maybe the way that I am touching instruments is different from the way that an instrumentalist would touch an instrument. Uh, and this is funny. I think, someone like Pierluigi Bellone does something also. He's writing for instruments in the way that he relates to the instruments. And sometimes that goes well or doesn't go well for the instrumentalist because they've worked really hard to develop a way of thinking about their instrument. Um, but yeah, for me, I'm kind of always thinking about how to incorporate movement into sound and how to think about movement as a material.
Can you explain a bit or give example on it?
Yeah, sure. Um, when I was sort of just finishing graduate school, I was really interested in building instruments that responded to movement. And the first kind of big iteration of that was like a massive technological project where I worked with an electronicist to build these instruments that like captured muscle impulses and converted them into signal. Um, it was a technology called XTH, Sense, and then sort of processing that through a max patch to do various things in various sections. And it was sort of a big choreographed piece with all of these movers who were hooked up to these sensors on different parts of our bodies. I think it was a successful piece. I enjoyed making it, and I really enjoyed the process of devising it with these amazing performers. But in the end, we also all looked like we just had umbilical cords hanging off of us, and then we had to renegotiate what that meant in the context of the piece as well. Um, and, we're replacing the batteries in our packs for these sensors like every time we would rehearse. And that was an undertaking. Sometimes something came unplugged or unsoldered. Sometimes, there were all of these concerns all of the time, and it was really stressful. So I think after that, I like pared down and started thinking about how I might distill uh, movement in a cleaner way or more economical way, I suppose. So the next piece was a pile of very thin pine planks, wooden planks, that I sort of put contact microphones in and around, allowing the microphone, they're pretty cheap, just allowed them to be damaged if necessary or if by accident. I put those on top of some aluminum foil and then put two dynamic microphones pointed at the foil, which made this kind of interesting, beautiful, tinny reverb. And we choreographed another piece for people standing atop the pine planks. So if you were leaning in a certain way, the planks would crackle and splinter. And the more you move, the more they splinter. And in some cases, like you could move a lot and the planks wouldn't splinter at all just because of the angle that one thing was on top of another. You needed them to be more like this than like this. So what also happened was that the performers also became listeners, right? And there's this sort of I mean, performers are always listeners, but in the case of this piece, there was this like feedback loop between the critical listening mind, where you are listening to see if something happens because you're not sure, it's pretty indeterminate. And then when something does happen, you sort of stay with that. And so it's between like, I am making this sound on purpose versus I am discovering something and going with it. So critical thinking, performativity, and discovery all kind of played into that piece. And then the next one kind of expanded, and it's a piece called Louise, which I named after an artist I like, Louise Nevelson. I was at the time like visiting a sculpture of hers pretty regularly and found it inspiring. But it's a big skirt, and it's like the size of a room, and a small room. And it's made out of a fabric that is cassette tape woven with polyester. And if you modify a cassette tape player in the way that, like Namjoon Paik did with his like wall tape pieces, you can play the fabric. It was a fabric designed by an artist named Elise Santoro. And I worked with a fashion designer who was really amazing. Her name is Scarlett. And we built this big skirt that was this fabric, some panels of organza, which is sheer, and then some panels of like jersey knit, which is really flexible. And so you have this like tape polyester, the sheer fabric, and the jersey knit. And there was an optical theremin underneath the skirt and several other pedals that I could control. And the skirt started out, I was standing on top of it and sort of moving, getting used to the space and vocalizing, imitating sounds that would come later. And then I put the skirt on, and like the way that my feet and legs are moving underneath um, made different sound according to how much light was passing through the sheer panels, and how the optical theremin was responding to that. And then ultimately I'm underneath it, and it becomes sort of like a cocoon that I wrap
Yes.
myself in while playing the the panels of tape fabric. Um,
So your piece is very, let's say, uh, very technological and very, let's say, material, right? So material.
Material. Yeah, I do enjoy the tactility very much. Yes. Yeah. And it's also like technology that I understand and feel connected to. And
And what kind of
lately I've
technology? What kind of technology?
honestly, yeah, analog pedals. I like that there are buttons that I can push. I don't mean to be uh, a, a Luddite, but again, I enjoy the tactility. And so I like working with tangible pedals. Um, That being said, I've had great luck like working with people who feel more inclined toward programming to build patches. Um,
Uh,
but there are other things that I want to sort of spend my time and thought energy on.
but this patches you build or somebody else for you build?
I advise and can build parts of the patches, but I don't feel adept enough um, as a programmer to build the whole thing. So like I
Got it.
need help, and I love being able to ask for help. That
And
feels really good.
yes,
There's this whole, I think I went to school for years and thousands of years, in the hopes that I would know how to do everything and not need any help. And since I finished school, the one thing I have been kind of working on is asking for help and understanding that there are things that I feel more drawn to and more excited about creatively. And if someone else is excited about something that could help me, it's such a good opportunity to collaborate. And
yes.
so, yeah, helping is so good for the process.
And what softwares you usually use or most frequently use?
Software
Yes.
on Adobe Audition and Ableton. That's what I use. um, Used to use some Macs, some PD. I find that that's not as much a part of my work anymore. Um, yeah, mostly hardware.
And what I noticed, right, is that in quite many of your pieces you use some choreography, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah. I
this
mean,
means that, right, correctly to say that your piece is not sound only piece, right? So it's not only about my my eyes. It's a more, let's say, multi-sensory experience.
yeah. Yeah, and here as well, I think. There are some where I mean, I love a subwoofer, you know. Um, I love when you can feel sound in your body. So I like that they are uh, oral and visual and can be felt. Um, that being said, I don't know, some of the pieces that were conceived as audio visual pieces, I have done sound only recordings of, and I really like the sound only recordings. Um, but I think I like them maybe because I can imagine what maybe what must be happening. And that sometimes my imagination is tricked. There's an artist, Taku Unami, um, who also does this. He's incorporating like concrete sound in addition to instrumental sound in addition to electronic sound. And you can think that you understand that you're just hearing some running water, but then suddenly this running water is a guitar, and suddenly this guitar is something else, or there's just a teacup being moved, or there is a bag of cans being dragged around. And I've never seen these pieces performed live, but I've only heard them. And it is a very exciting thing to listen to them and feel movement without understanding what the movement is. So I think I like both of those things. But also, I am inherently a performer and I love attention. And so I like the pieces to be visual and seen when they are.
And what is the difference when you compose, like, let's say, sound only piece and multi-sensorial piece? What's different for you as a composer?
Oh, what a good question. Let me think about this. Hmm. I mean, I think maybe it's related to what I was just talking about, Taku Unami's music. I think about obscuring origin a little bit, like the origin of the sound. I think about slowly training the ears to maybe stop thinking about a tangible thing that you can relate to based on what you're hearing, um, and to open up to like a wider spectrum of perception. It's kind of like when you're learning a new language, right? There's a long time when you are hearing a word in another language and then translating it back to your native language in your head before you understand it. And so it makes this process of translation very slow. But eventually, the more conversational you become, the more fluent you become, you stop thinking about the process of translation and you just hear it in the other language. And so I think maybe what I'm trying to do with sound only work is to train people to stop trying to translate. Um, and also, there is a lot that we hear when we're only listening, right? I just made a recorded thing. It's sort of a kooky live electronics set for my lap steel guitar, which I'm not great at playing, but if you run it through many, many pedals, no one can tell. Um, where I play a lot in the very opening with white noise and frequency and just filters and just messing with the frequency knobs on the mixer, and like the whole piece could just be that, right?
Mhm.
You eventually start listening on a finer level, right? I think sound only pieces, there's an opportunity for very fine, very precise listening that sometimes when you're also watching something, you might miss.
Mhm. Yes.
Yeah. So you can get very microscopic when you're doing sound only pieces, and I do love that as well.
And what triggered you to write this multisensorial pieces, audiovisual pieces? What was the trigger?
Um, I think I was in an opera, like a dance opera, that was a collaboration between the composer Ryan Ingebrigtsen and the choreographer, dramaturg, performance artist Erica Mott. And we devised this work for about 4 years. Ryan was building sort of motion sensor uh, instruments. In the case of this opera, it was about, we used like the Nintendo Wii controller as a signal thing, and then we also used sewing machines, which had sensors on the sewing needles for this piece. And we were dancing a lot. It was an exhausting piece. I was running miles every performance. We were pushing enormous tables. We were screaming. uh, I have to say, it was very amazing. But it reminded me that I love moving and that I love a deep, long, intentional and intense and exhausting process. I love this. And I had missed that intensity in my life, like sitting and writing. And yeah, so I think like waking up, like, I would go to dance classes casually for fun. I would trade voice lessons for babysitting. I would once I sort of transitioned into like being a composer, I decided that I really wanted to focus on that. And so there were a few years where I wasn't like engaging with everything that is like part of my creative persona. And so I think it was just like the reawakening of all of those parts of how I make things and how I enjoy creating that maybe triggered this expansion of my work. Even though like I think it was kind of always there, but when I was learning to compose, I really wanted to focus and I really wanted to like write the notes.
Yes.
Also, I worked when I was living in Cleveland with a bassist named Scott Dixon, who plays with the Cleveland Orchestra, who was at the time, he still does, I suppose, doing a lot of Feldenkrais, and he wanted a piece for bass and voice and cello. We had a mutual friend, Danielle Pereira, who is a cellist. And so I wrote this piece for Scott and Danielle and myself. Um, and we were thinking about how to connect bow strokes to breath. Um, and that was also sort of a thing that generated a lot of energy for me. And then also, we realized there were physical limitations. I wanted him to be doing things on the bass with both hands, but I also wanted the fundamental of his bottom string to be constantly lowering itself. And he had C gates on his lowest string, and I didn't have anything I needed to do with my hands. So I, as the vocalist, was just opening the gates over time. And so it became this very enmeshed physical process of, yeah, for that piece. And there was another one, I think, before that, where I had set a poem, well, a pretty violent poem about domestic abuse by a poet, Virginia Conchin. And it was for a piano trio and vocalist. And like, in a pretty problematic way, I have to say, I sort of choked out the piano as the pianist was playing. This was a long time ago. I feel like this was like 2008 or
Yes.
something.
And
So yeah.
looking back, right? Looking back to your music, how your music changed in last years, right?
Oh man. Um, well, you know this sentiment, like the more you know, the more you realize you don't know anything. I think over the last 10 years, I've realized how little I know about things. And maybe how much more curious I am. And I've realized maybe that I'm not as good at the things that I always thought that I should be good at, and so have been looking for other places where maybe I excel. And I think it's kind of still a journey. Um, I think my work has become a little bit more discovery oriented than
Mhm.
mastery oriented. I've come to appreciate and adore failure, which comes and goes, honestly. So there's a complicated relationship with failure, but I think I'm getting better at embracing it and maybe liking it and maybe, you know, letting it inspire something else. Like, what is it? David Tudor said this thing about letting your materials or your electronics determine the way that you're going to go, like treating them like your friends, um, almost like biological organisms. They have their own personalities, and you have a deep relationship with them uh, because you work with them all the time. And so you learn to just let them do what they need to do. And so I feel that way about electronics, but I think I also feel that way about my body. And I also feel that way about collaborating with performers, with other people. I no longer want to make people do things. I kind of want to see what they do, and
Hmm.
I want us to maybe figure that out together. That being said, that's a big statement, and I'm definitely about to write a piece where I just tell people what to do.
Okay. Okay.
So hypocrisy, that's another thing that's come up in 10
How
years.
you usually compose, right? How you start and what kind of stages you go?
Hmm. Hmm. Great questions. Okay. Composing. Hmm. I think usually I start with something that I think is cool. Um, so you know, we have a mutual dear friend in Robert Fleitz, who was performing with the group Intercontemporaneous. No, nope, I've conflated two ensembles. He was performing with Contemporaneous. Intercontemporaneous is a different ensemble. Um, anyway, I was writing this piece for the Mata Festival, um, and around that time, I guess I just sort of like listen to the world, watch things around me, see what's interesting. If I have nothing to say, I'm like watching things. Or there will be things that have been in the back of my head for a long time that I think like, oh, I really want to make something like that. But the piece I wrote for this group Robert was performing in uh, was inspired by public restrooms. I love hand dryers, public restroom hand dryers. You know what they're with the blowing of air and those really nice ones where you put your hands down in it and then you hear
Hmm.
and the way the column of air, the size of the column of air is changing and the frequency is changing along with it. And so I have this idea to like run some air through pipes of different sizes to change the sizes of columns of air. And then like built these little instruments with fans in the back of PVC pipes with little condenser microphones on the very end of the pipe. And then performers are sort of moving in front of the pipe and changing the size of the air column and then also like the frequency of the sound that's coming out. Uh, yeah, so that's kind of how that piece started. Is I just had a very enjoyable experience with a bathroom hand dryer, and then it was also winter, and I there's this flock of starling. I don't know if they're starlings. They're flocking birds, is the point, who come and hang out in my courtyard, which is I'm looking at it outside my window. Let's see if you can see.
Hmm.
Yeah, there's a little courtyard out here.
Okay.
Not showing you the rest of my messy kitchen. Um, I was watching these birds a lot, kind of spending a lot of time with birds. So there's this like sub narrative in the piece, this piece about air that is also kind of about birds.
Hmm.
Yeah, and the process of writing that was really just learning this instrument, and it took like a couple of like months to figure out how to actually make the instrument work. And then thinking about relationships between the performers, how I wanted them to be interacting. And then I kind of wrote like a combination text score with some vague pitch material, um, which was, that was sort of a throwback to, you know, junior year of undergrad composition lessons, where my teacher at the time, Chuck Mason, would just ask me to envision what I wanted to hear and set a timer and make notes over time. And so I still think that if I am composing and writing a piece for other people, that it's entirely based on desire, and what you would really like to hear. But what's also nice about that is that you're trying to make this thing that you want to hear, and then you go down a lot of rabbit holes trying to make this thing, And then over time, as you're in these rabbit holes, you sometimes stumble upon other things that you didn't know that you were sort of desperate to hear. And maybe you make it back to the other thing, and maybe you don't. But yeah, and then sort of the final process of that piece was live rehearsals. I like to put myself at a mixing board, and as I was doing with this piece I described earlier with just me at a mixer, mess with frequency and create some controlled feedback as well. So you have these things that the performers are responding to, some of which are controllable, some of which are not. You have a natural element, you have air. Um, and then there's this other kind of organic element, or metaphorically organic element of feedback, which you can also sort of play with. So I like adding layers of indeterminacy, I think,
Got it.
so that you're never not in this state of discovery.
And what do what you fear as composers the most? What is your composer fear?
Oh, I mean, this is trite, but I do still kind of want people to like it. I mean, it's fine. I think if someone doesn't like something, then you've maybe done something cool. You've maybe done something that is intense. I think my fear is
People won't like it.
I'm taking that back. This is maybe my trend. I will say something that I maybe think off the
Yes.
top of my head, and
And
then
then
I'm
you
like,
will,
I don't
yes, and
I
then
don't
you will
know.
write
Now that I think
it.
about it,
Yes.
I'm a revisionist in my
Yes, I see, I
composing as
see, I see,
well.
I see, I see.
But no, I think, okay, let's home in. I think maybe I'm afraid of making something that is middling, that just lives in here, and that is like, that means nothing to anyone, that doesn't mean anything to me, that just kind of lives in this blah place that's
Yes,
neutral, that no one has any feelings about. I think maybe that's what I'm afraid of.
got it. And why you
I don't know.
why do you still compose?
Why? Okay, funny story. I'm kind of not sure that I do. I mean, I think I'm
So
still
you're not
making things.
composing, right? So
This
you make,
whole interview is a lie. No, I think I'm composing. I think maybe these days I feel more that I'm devising. I
what do you mean
haven't
devising? What do you mean devising?
yeah. I've been thinking about the score as something different. Maybe, I mean, and there's a great Celeste Oram gives a really nice. She gave a really nice talk about this at a conference a few years ago. For her, the score, you can think very differently about what a score is, and for her, sometimes it's video. For her, sometimes it's memory. Um, but for me, the score can just be a thing that like lives inside you, not in a
Got it, got it.
the body keeps the score book kind of way. Great book. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about maybe it's not written down, maybe it's just a thing, that an understanding that we all share, and a connected collective consciousness about what we're doing,
Yes,
that is the result of like a lot of rehearsal and time spent together. Uh, And so, like, the score is developed as a thing that we all know in our bodies now. For this piece with the sensors, there was never a score until the end when I had to make a score because it was my dissertation piece. And so we made the piece, and then I like took a
okay, you
bunch of
need the score, right?
screenshots of the video. Yeah, I had to, you can't graduate if you don't make a score. So I made one where I would take screenshots of the video and then call something like the things we called things, like this one is suspension bridge. This one is angel. This one, and so we had names for all the shapes and movements we were doing We had one that
Got
was
it.
called butter carving. And so then I decided that those would be the names of movements, and then I would like write down stuff we did and things we thought about. Um, so I think maybe was that what do I still compose? So if the score is a thing that is more lived than read, then yes. But again, I'm about to write a score for a piece, so we're gonna see how that goes.
Yes.
It'll definitely be fine and not a disaster, I think.
And now question not maybe so much about your music, but in general, right? How new music
Yeah.
scene change in the United States during this century?
Ooh, this century. I was thinking about this morning because you sent me some questions. And I was thinking of, thinking of movements, thinking of collectives, thinking of like group consciousness around aesthetics. If you look at Dada, you look at Surrealism, you look at
Yes,
Fluxus, you look at, downtown, uptown, bang on a can. You have all of these like decided movements that people could align themselves with.
yeah.
And I kept trying to think of like, are those still happening? Is there like a group of people who are saying, we do this. Do you want to also do this with us? Or, and I genuinely can't think of them,
So you
but
think
it
we are
could
more
just,
individualistic, right?
I feel maybe, yes. And I would blame a bit social media on this, that it perhaps isolates us and draws us more into, you know, um, a smaller sphere of interaction while also expanding our knowledge bases of everything, right? There are some arguments to be made about the algorithm, I suppose, that you just end up seeing things that you already know. But you have the possibility to see everything. Um, so it feels, yeah, it feels a little more individualistic. That being said, I'm sure I know so many other artists who are doing corporeal work, right? But we don't say like, hey, do you want to do you want to write a manifesto and
Yeah.
be the new corporealists?
Yes.
But we are all making it, but it's going to take some really great musicologist or theorist or critic
Yes.
to observe the field and write these things.
Yes. There are
Um,
more, much more cooperation between artists than before. But
and
meanwhile, there is less and less feeling that you belong to some group. The languages are very individualistic, very we reinvent maybe piece by
mm,
piece, right?
yeah, yeah. Um, like may and then I don't know, there's this thing about resources I've been thinking about. Capitalism is a this will be the most simplistic thing I've said all day. Capitalism is such a problem. Um, there's this thing that happens in US where like I go to a concert and if I don't like it, I'm mad. Where like this is an admission I probably shouldn't make, but I know friends in other countries who go to a concert and if they don't like it, they're like, wasn't really my thing, and then they go away. Um, and I don't know, I have this hypothesis that in US we feel like there aren't enough resources of time, of money, of energy, for all of us to share because there aren't, because capitalism is like coming from a scarcity mindset and everyone is sort of fighting for the same resources all the time. So that like it naturally engenders these feelings of competitiveness. Um, and I wish that weren't the case.
Got it.
Uh,
Got it.
and so it would be nice if we could maybe all write a manifesto and get together, and then the people who are working, doing some of the same work would just feel like they were contributing to the interesting nature of whatever collective they're a part of. I mean, I myself am part of a collective, but I don't know if we have a manifesto. I think we just like are friends and had agreed on some things and decided that we wanted to like ask a bunch of questions together. We're called MockRep and .org if anybody's interested. But there are like 11 of us, and we
Got it.
just kind of make what we make, but we're not, I don't know, we're not a movement.
Yes, and
We're just a group.
and where's this new music scene in United States, and where it's heading, right? What is or there is no
Where's
direction, there is no trends.
I might not be the person to ask about it, but I feel like it is moving in it's in an entropic fashion. I feel like it is expanding so much into so many different directions, uh, hence more individualism, which maybe is great, to where eventually it will be sort of chaotic white noise. Um,
Got got
I
it.
think I think that's maybe where it's going.
And how new how audience of new music change?
Hmm. I mean, in my own city,
Which is your city, by the way?
I live in
City.
Chicago.
Okay.
Yeah, been in Chicago for about 12 years. Um, I'm trying to think about how it's changing. Um, Honestly, it depends on what's being made, I think. Uh, Again, I'm not so sure how the audiences have changed. I'll say that you know, American orchestras are now having like composer in residence. Uh, and the most well publicized things are the things that get the best audience. Um, in Chicago, I used to see much more support for underground
Yes.
performance, for like the crazier, more experimental work, but um, sometimes it's feeling like the pandemic maybe had an impact on how much we want to present, and I see those audiences dwindling a little bit. But
Got
that
it.
could just be that we all need to come back out of our shells and get comfortable making things again. Um, I don't know. I feel a little too close to it, maybe, to be able to say
Yes.
how
Got it.
how the
And
audience has changed.
and what is role of new music in Chicago society, would say?
Whoa.
Or,
Um,
or there are, maybe there are not no any role, right? It could be, right?
I mean, I think that new music is, as a field, is changing and growing and maybe becoming less of a singular monolithic entity, right? As I said, we're all sort of expanding in this entropic way and creating like a wider field of things that are being made. And like maybe something is new music and maybe it is just like it is a fringe techno or something. Maybe it is fringe performance art. But I think that maybe the role of this kind of experimental work is to ask some questions about what is possible, to ask some questions about what kind of sounds you can make. Uh, I, you know, I've lately been thinking a little bit about ornament and the way that certain, electronic processes are used primarily as ornament. So like reverb is usually a last thing that you add to something. A phaser is an ornamental modulation effect. But what if reverb is the only thing that you're working with and you're removing all of the sound sources and only playing with reverb? Then you can learn a whole lot about reverb. What if rather than using a phaser as an ornamental effect, you're only using the phaser as a thing that's
Good.
making the sound to begin with? A lot of people have done that before. But I think maybe the role of experimental music is just to push the envelope of what you can do with what is already there, and to maybe teach language a little bit. That's utopian, but
Got it.
expand your perception of what you think is possible.
Got it.
That's that's really idealistic of me.
Yeah. Last question. In 3 sentences, what would be your 3 suggestions to younger composers? 1 suggestion, 1 sentence.
One suggestion is 1 sentence. Okay, I think I'm gonna go back to something I said earlier, which is think about the thing that you. It has to be 1 sentence. Can it be a really long run-on sentence?
It could be really long.
Okay. All right. Think about the thing that you really, really want to hear, that you're imagining you would like to hear, and go about trying to make it. And while you're in the process of trying to make it, keep your mind and ears open to the other things that come up, and maybe you'll fuck around and find something else that you didn't know you wanted to hear that now you must. That was 1 sentence.
Yes.
Okay. Second sentence. Feels very related to the last one, but joy in music is productive.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Short and the third.
Third sentence. Okay. Third sentence. This has to be so profound. Okay. Oh, yeah. Get help from your friends.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the interview.
Yeah, I just thought of the answer to the question about what was the best piece I heard recently.
Yes.
It was utterly joyful and brought me so much joy as well. Is an artist named Andrew Tom, who who made an album about how to. He sort of made a bunch of how-to tutorials for surrealistic things that sort of went in very strange directions. And he has this one track in the album called something like How to Open a Portal with a Donut. And he had bought donuts for the show, and every pair of people were to grab a donut. And I sat with my friend, and we each held on one side of a donut and listened as Andrew talked us through how to open a portal with our donut. And it did so many things. It was funny and delightful, but this was a friend I didn't know that well. And so sitting and holding a donut with them for a long time was pretty uncomfortable, but also nice. Um, And also, like, Andrew is a very sensitive and nuanced sonic thinker, so the sound material of this piece was also stunning and complicated and campy. And I usually don't go in for camp, but he does it really, really well. Um, that's a piece that I loved, that I
Okay.
thought was really good.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's
Thank you.
delightful talking to you.
Yeah.
All right.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.